Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. Landis, we're flying high. How good is North football, dude?
It's really good, and I'm happy to part of me was, I don't know if nervous is the right word, but I wanted the Oregon Washington game to live up to the hype, and it more than delivered. So yeah, we're feeling really good about Northern football.
I, I thought going into the Washington-Oregon game, which we previewed extensively last week, and guess what? We're going to preview extensively the Ohio State-Penn State game on this episode of Kings of the North. If you had trepidation about, I don't know, like Washington, are they kind of a one-trick pony? I I I think they are kind of a one-trick pony, but the trick is so good.
Yeah.
It's the best pony you ever saw. So I came away, I think, more convinced that Washington is actually a very legit national title contender, and I don't think Oregon's far behind.
No, I think they're both very good. I think we'll get into it, I guess, a little bit, but I am of the belief that they'll play again. We'll discuss that more in a few minutes here. But yeah, I was probably I was impressed with Washington because I thought they were a one trick pony. I wasn't quite sold on the ability to win games like that when there's really only one way to win if you're Washington. But they did it. They found a way. Like, it wasn't a perfect day for Michael Penix, but they won because of their ability to be explosive, which is it's fine. If you can do that against Oregon, I think you can do it against anybody.
It'll be a very different game, but if we get a version of Ohio State-Penn State that is as competitive and high level as Washington-Oregon, I think everybody in the North will be very happy. We appreciate you guys joining us here. We do this every Monday early in the week. We run through the best, most interesting things in Northern football. We start with the Frantic 14. That's 7 topics, 2 minutes each. Then we're going to talk about the best teams in the North and talk about what are the best regular season wins for all the best teams in the North in the playoff era. And there's a particular reason we're doing that. We'll go behind enemy lines, talk about the best teams in the South, compare them to the best teams in the North. The South might not like that. Do best players, of course, the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show. I have a special edition of that this week that might just inspire you. We've been going for chuckles. I think now we're going for chills. Then we'll do the look ahead, best games, and then we'll dig in on Ohio State, Penn State at the end. But first up, the Frantic 14, Bill Landis and Doug Lesmerises. Here we go. Number 1, could Air Force win the Big Ten West, Landis? We are grabbing the Air Force Falcons. We talk about the 28 teams in the North. Those are Power 5 teams. Air Force in the Mountain West is not one of those teams, but we're grabbing them because they're so good and so interesting. A 34-27 win over Wyoming last week. They're 6-0. They're number 22 in the AP poll. And are they better than Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Northwestern, Wisconsin, everybody in the West? What do you think?
I'd like their chances to win because
Yeah.
the thing, so they're just an absolute machine running the football. They're the best rushing team in the country, and they run it a lot, and yet they're still top 10 in rushing average. They're number 1 in touchdowns, they're number 1 in yards, they're number 1 in yards per game. But they also lead the country in passing efficiency, which is kind of weird. They've only thrown it 28 times this year, but their ability to throw it when they need to, their devastating rushing attack. And oh, by the way, they're pretty good on defense. They're number 13 in the country in defensive yards per play, and they haven't been top 20 nationally in that stat since 2009. So this is a very good version of an Air Force defense. They've had some abysmal defenses over the years, while they've still been a pretty good program. Yes, I think they could and would win the Big Ten West this year.
Here's a comparison point. Air Force beat Utah State, let's see, 39-21, I think. They outgained them 428-302. Iowa, who's leading the Big Ten West, beat Utah State 24-14 in a game that Utah State actually outgained Iowa. The bottom line is Air Force beat Utah State worse than Iowa beat Utah State. Another reason for us to claim these guys, and if we were fully rolling on Kings of the North like we're going to be next year, we'd have this guy on the show. Zach Larrier, their quarterback, ran for 111 yards last week. It was a career high for him. He's from Ohio. Both his parents are from Ohio. He went to high school in California. I couldn't completely get his whole story. His dad passed away of a heart condition when Zach was 3. He's been at Air Force. I think this is his 5th year. He waited his turn, and he is leading this offense, brother. What a great story. It's an Ohio kid. You go to his bio, Youngstown.
Yeah.
We're all about this guy. This should be America's team. They have a shot to be a very good shot to make a New Year's Six bowl as the Group of 5 representative. I don't know who's going to beat them. They won this Wyoming game as a barn burner. John Lee Eldridge, the third 58-yard touchdown run. in the final 2.5 minutes. And this is like a historic program. Again, one piece of trivia. This might be the best service academy team in 60 years, by the way. Like, this is how good this is. In 1985, they finished in the top 10. Air Force did. They were really good. Like, they lost to BYU by a touchdown. If they had beaten BYU, they might have had a backdoor shot at a national title game appearance. Troy Calhoun is in year 17 as the Air Force head coach. Fisher DeBerry was there for 23 years before him. When the program started, Ben Martin coached it for 28 years. They've only had 3 other coaches besides those 3 guys who were there for 2 decades. Do you know who coached Air Force for 1 year? In 1978, a super famous football coach was the 1-year head coach of Air Force. We're now
Lee
doing
Corso.
Air Force trivia. What?
Lee Corso.
Really good. Bill Parcells.
Really?
How crazy is that?
That is
He was
crazy.
the head coach at Air Force in 1978. So anyway, this is a historic program that has continuity and has had peaks in the past and is peaking right now. We want to make you aware of how good Air Force is. Get on board, man. Get on board with these guys. It's fun to watch them, and they might have it. You might be seeing them against a top 10 team in a bowl game later on. We want to give props to Air Force because, yeah, they're in the North, baby. All right, number 2, we got teams in trouble, and we're going to run through 4 teams in trouble, Landis, and I'm going to ask you, are they okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you can take that however you want to take it, and, you're the final arbiter here. I'm just the guy with the notebook. First off is Syracuse. They've lost 3 straight games. They got blown out by Florida State after previously getting blown out by Clemson and North Carolina. They've been outscored 112-24 in their last 3 games. They're now 4-3 after last year they started 6-0 and lost 5 straight. This year they started 4-0 and lost 3 straight. Are they okay?
No, I don't think so. It seems like their method or their way of winning is Garrett Schrader needs to run for 200 yards or else they can't win, or else they can't beat good teams, I guess, to be more specific. So, like, does anyone expect them to win these games? I guess not, as they're currently constructed and how the opponents are constructed. But I do think Syracuse should be a more competitive football program than it is against the best teams in the ACCs. And I don't see that really changing given the track record last year and now this year. So I think they're in a little bit of a rough spot.
Okay, Washington State started 4-0. Lost to UCLA 25-17. Then last week got blown out by Arizona. Arizona's been a problem for a lot of teams, but not like this. 44-6, Arizona wins. Cam Ward in that game was their great starting quarterback, who we were all about after he beat Oregon State, was 22 of 30 for 192. In the Oregon State game, for example, he was 28 of 34 for 404. In the first 4 games, their first 4 wins, his average yards per attempt was 9.8. The last 2 games, the 2 losses, it's 5.6. I don't know if people have figured out how to stop that offense. Is Washington State okay?
I think they're still dangerous, right? Jake Dickert after the game was talking about we have to run the ball better. They have 47 total rushing yards in their last 2 games against Arizona and UCLA. And I guess when you are that one-dimensional, the margin for error is incredibly thin. And it seemed like that Washington State found the wrong side of that in this game. But it was also, too, what I said about last week when we were talking about the flaws of the best teams in the North. Like, this team does not value the football. They turn it over way too much. So as long as they keep doing that, like, I don't think I can say they're okay. But with Cam Ward and those receivers, like, I do think they're a team you have to take seriously week after week. So there's some things to figure out there. Like, they got to be better on defense. They got to be more balanced on offense, I think, long term for that program to sustain. But this year in particular, I still would be on alert if I see them go off my schedule because of how deadly that passing attack can be.
But it feels like they're much more a spoiler than a contender.
Yes,
in the
for
Pac-12.
sure. Yep.
All right, Colorado blew a 29-0 halftime lead to Stanford. Colorado is now 4-3, and they're trying to make a bowl game, and you don't know if they're going to do it. They have UCLA, Oregon State, Arizona, Washington State, and Utah left. Is Colorado okay?
I don't think they're okay this year if we're talking about getting to a bowl game, because like they had to win this game, and now if you look at the remainder of their games, like the Arizona game was the other one where you think like, oh, I think they can get that. Now Arizona's playing really well. I really don't see a world where they can beat UCLA, Oregon State, Washington State, or Utah. Maybe they can beat Washington State. I don't know, but it's tougher now. Like, and it would have been a really good story, I think, for Colorado to make a bowl game. I'm less bullish on that idea. There's some like game management stuff there that I'm questioning. Like, one, their overtime strategy of taking the ball first, I think, is wrong. They
Yeah.
did that against Stanford and they ended up losing. And also, like Travis Hunter comes back from, was it like a lacerated liver? Is that what he had? Is that why he
Kidney, I think, but
kidney?
yeah.
Some lacerated
Last
anything
that's
is
yeah.
is serious. And he like played the entire game and he got absolutely torched on defense. And like obviously they need him to play. There are talent deficiencies up and down that roster. They still have a good quarterback, they still have good receivers, they don't have much of anything else. So I'm not surprised to see, like, I guess the chickens come home to roost a little bit on their roster construction, but I also think they can manage it better. So like long term, I still believe in what Dion's doing there, but this year I think can get away from them.
All right, last one is West Virginia. They lost on Thursday night on a Hail Mary to their old coach, Dana Holgerson, who left West Virginia to go to Houston several years ago. They had fought back. West Virginia was down 35-24. They fight back. They get a 50-yard touchdown pass with 12 seconds to play on a 4th and 10. It is like, it's awesome. And then they lose on a Hail Mary in part because the quarterback, Garrett Green, who threw the touchdown pass, took off his helmet in a
Yeah.
celebration, got a 15-yard penalty and made the Hail Mary easier. This was a team that we've talked about Neil Brown maybe saving his job with those 4 straight wins after the Penn State loss to open. I follow some West Virginia people on the social medias, man. There was a lot of frustration. They gave up a 100-yard kickoff return in this game, and that they blow it on a Hail Mary. It felt like a bubbling over point. I don't know. Is West Virginia and specifically Neil Brown, are they okay?
Less okay than I would have said a week ago, right? We thought he was doing stuff to save that job, but they've been like living on the razor's edge the entire year. Like I said, like I don't know why they were favored going into this game because they've not played like a team who should be favored on the road against anybody with a pulse. Like they've won games probably that they shouldn't have, but credit to them for doing it. But like if you told me they were going to lose the rest of their games, I would say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. If you told me they could win a few of them, like, yeah, that makes sense too. They've just been that kind of team this year. But to lose a game like this in this fashion, like I'm a little worried about it now. Spiraling on them, spiraling on Neil Brown. They got to play Oklahoma State this week. Oklahoma State seems to have stuff figured out. Like UCF, BYU, Oklahoma, Cincinnati, Baylor can certainly all beat this West Virginia team. So um, it's precarious. Like it could definitely get away from them. And I think if it does, then Neil Brown is firmly back on the hot seat.
All right. That was long. We'll go a little bit faster now, starting with number 3, Rutgers. Rutgers is down 24-6 entering in the 4th quarter against Michigan State. By all the accounts of the people there covering the game, maybe 3,000 fans left in the stands. Bad weather. It's raining on them. Their team is down. And Rutgers comes back to win. Greg Schiano looks like the happiest coach in America on the sideline. This is a great quote from Johnny Langdon from Rutgers that was passed along by Steve Politi, the columnist out there, about everybody leaving. Respect is earned. I think we earned some respect today. In the future, maybe they'll stick around a little longer. It's like a great approach to that. Everything that you saw from the Rutgers players was praising the people who did stay, not ripping the people who left. But by the way, this team is 5-0 at home this year, 5-2 on the season. How you feeling about the Scarlet Knights, man?
I feel good about the Scarlet Knights. They have 2 home games left against Ohio State and Maryland. So, like the Ohio State one, maybe not the party they're going to want it to be, but I hope they have a packed house for when they play Maryland at the end of the year and cap off what I think will be a bowl season for Rutgers. Their defense is tremendous. They cannot throw the football, but Kyle Monungai, man, like that, I think Kyle Monungai, their running back, is like quietly one of the better running backs in the North and perhaps the country at 146 yards in this game, including the game-winning touchdown. Like statistically, he stacks up pretty well. And this is a program that's like had some sneaky good running backs in the past, like Isaiah Pacheco, right, who's now doing stuff for the Kansas City Chiefs at a pretty high level. So like I'd pay attention to him. I'd pay attention to Rutgers because I do think they are close to maximizing, I think, what they can be in the Big Ten.
One of the main goals of the show is to help fans in the North love their team. And I've made a lot of fun of Rutgers over the years. I still don't know if long-term for that program, if the Big Ten was the right move for them. But I think this could be a line in the sand. Like, awesome. If that's the idea, if these players are invigorated by this win, if the fan base says, hey, man, we're going to believe in these guys, like that's a wonderful thing for a group of fans that haven't had a ton to cheer about in the Big Ten. And you thought Greg Schiano might get it done. They do it a very specific way. They're trying to be the Iowa of the East Coast and win with defense. But Gavin Wimsatt as a quarterback who's going to end up being like a 4-year starter there, that was a plan to bring in a young guy and play him. I'm very happy for those fans and for those players. And I think the idea of like earning trust and earning faith, awesome.
Mhm.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So congrats to Rutgers on that huge win. All right. Number 4, Utah played a safety at running back, and he ran for 158 yards, and it's just Utah being Utah. Sione Vaki, he he's second on the team in defensive snaps for Utah this year. It's not like some backup guy. They're like, hey, you're not. He plays every snap at safety. They played him 20 snaps at running back against Cal. He ran 15 times for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's an unbelievable individual effort. But for a Utah team that has not had its starting quarterback all year, has not had its most talented skill player in its starting tight end all year, now has 2 injuries at running back, 2 freshmen at running back, and decided, man, we got to play a safety here. Kyle Whittingham continues to get it done, but props to Sione Vaki for playing both ways.
It's crazy, and I think it's like quintessential Utah that they they have figured this out. They tried him once as like a wildcat quarterback in their last game before the bye week, and then they just like made him the feature back in this game, which is kind of insane, but it's awesome. That's what's one of the things that I love about college football is that it can be so unpredictable. Well, so I think they're still fairly limited on offense. Like they play USC. I think they can give USC a game. I'm less bullish on the idea of them beating Oregon and Washington, given the way they're currently constructed on offense. But see what Notre Dame did to USC over the weekend. I think Utah can do a similar thing.
Yeah, so it's the 2-time defending Pac-12 champ, and they're going to play all the big boys. I think they are going to play a role in the Pac-12 race. I don't know if that means they're going to win the Pac-12, but I think they might get somebody. It might be USC this week, or it might be Oregon or Washington down the line. I think they can help determine who does make the Pac-12 title game because they're so tough and they're so smart and they're so well coached. And this was a great example of it. All right, number 5, Wisconsin lost to Iowa. Maryland lost to Illinois. And my question is, who is going forward going to be the 4th best program of the current Big Ten teams as USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington come in next year? If we've established that Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State are at the top, this just was an example of, a lot of times you would take it as, hey, it's a tough, deep league. But I think Wisconsin and Maryland were 2 teams that, people were kind of pointing toward as like, hey, maybe Maryland will make another step this year. Wisconsin year 1 over under Luke Fickell. I don't know. Let me give you a stat. In the playoff era, 9 years of the 14 playoff, I did finishing in the top 4 of the Big Ten teams at the end of the year in the AP rankings. There were 2 years where there were only 3 teams ranked. So then I only did 3. But otherwise, I did the top 4. Here's who finished in the top 4 by program in the last 9 years. Ohio State, 9 out of 9 in the top 4. Penn State and Michigan, 5. Michigan State and Wisconsin, 4. Iowa, 3. Northwestern, 2. And Minnesota and Indiana, 1. It's more varied maybe than you would think. And we have to remember that like Michigan and Penn State haven't always been there. They've been there like half the time in this era, but not constantly. Maybe I shouldn't even be thinking about it. Maybe the answer is it's going to be somebody different every year. But I thought like this was a tough loss for Maryland. Illinois was looking very vulnerable. Maryland comes into Ohio State 2 weeks ago, all excited. And then they follow an Ohio State loss with another loss. I don't know. Do they need a 4th team to be good, or is it just going to be rotating and that's the way it is? Or what do you make of this?
I mean, I don't think that I consider Maryland in those terms. I think Wisconsin could potentially be that team, right? Like Luke Fickell being there and like the tradition of that program. I expect them to have a good defense more often than not. Their defense this year is pretty good. I think there's a higher level of defensive play we've seen from that program that they can still get to, but this is a fairly good Wisconsin defense. They just got to figure out quarterback. Like I think they have the right idea with what they want to do with the offense in general. The thing that I'm fearful of, I guess, with Wisconsin is them sort of hopping on the transfer quarterback merry-go-round and picking a different guy out of the portal every year to try to solve their problems. I think they have to recruit high school quarterbacks and find a guy there and develop them. Otherwise, I think they're going to have too many dips to be the consistently 4th best program, as I'm saying. But if they can figure that out, then I have faith in them getting there. Less so Maryland. I think Maryland's going to have some ebbs and flows, just sort of the nature of their program and that university. I just don't think you can consistently be a team that's winning 8-9 games every year.
We had talked last week about the idea of, I think, like Kirk Ferentz was skeptical of this Wisconsin offensive shift, and this was going to be a head-to-head battle. Iowa threw it 14 times in that win. Wisconsin threw it 50 times in the loss.
Yeah.
Now, their starting quarterback got hurt. Tanner Mordecai went out during that game, and that certainly affected them. But Iowa was already on his backup quarterback because their starter already is out for the year. So just a weird situation. One of the things I do think is the Big Ten does miss Michigan State being competitive like that.
Mhm.
We can't forget, I think, how important a program Michigan State has been in the last 15 years in the Big Ten. And when they're a mess, I think the conference feels it a little bit. All right, time to plant some flags. Number 6, I'm going to plant my flag on this. I'm saying Oregon State's going to make the Pac-12 title game. I actually put a bet on this before the season started, partly because of schedule, partly because I believed in Oregon State. I think it was another good win this past week against UCLA, right? You weren't as impressed 2 weeks ago against Cal. They don't play USC, but when I look at the conference standings right now for the Pac-12, USC is coming off a Notre Dame loss. They're still undefeated, though, in the Pac-12. So USC's 4-0, Washington's 3-0, Oregon State is 3-1, and then Oregon and Utah are 2-1. I just think USC is going to lose multiple games. I get down to a point, Landis, where I think Washington's going to make the Pac-12 title game at either 9-0 or 8-1. And then the way I calculate it, I have USC and Utah both finishing 6-3 in the Pac-12, and I have Oregon and Oregon State playing their rivalry game on the last game of the season, both at 6-2 in the Pac-12, and the winner makes the Pac-12 title game. And I think Oregon State can win that game. So I'm in on Oregon State, and you are less so.
You have Oregon losing again before that game?
Yeah, I have somebody getting them. Maybe Utah. Like I have somebody
Mm.
getting them. Their short passing game. Like I've just been. I'm not out on Oregon by any means, but in a world where they have to play USC, they have to play Utah, they have to play Washington State. I just think maybe somebody gets them.
I feel like you're a little bit of an Oregon hater.
I feel like I am too. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's on purpose. I don't know what happened exactly. I mean, they played very well. I just I get Dan Lanning being aggressive in those situations. Um, I don't know. I like how Washington goes about it better.
Yeah.
And I still think Washington is just more dangerous. I just think the path for Oregon's a little more narrow. And so it's not that I don't believe in them, but that's how I see it. I see Oregon playing for a Pac-12 title game spot, which would be awesome if we got to that point. And I just like the cut of Oregon State's jib.
I put a bet on Oregon State before the year to win the Pac-12, so I would be okay with this happening. But I've also come around on it's Washington and Oregon, and then a step down to everybody
Okay.
else. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Plant your flag then.
I'm gonna make this relatively short. I think I want to read a quote. This is from BYU head coach Kalani Sitake after BYU lost 44-11 to a TCU team that was playing its backup quarterback. Kalani Sitake said, "Sometimes you have to pivot and figure out other ways to do things. You just can't keep doing the same things and expect the results to change. We definitely have to pivot and do some things, but they are all within the realm of our capabilities. We have the players and the talent to do it." I think BYU has been hit with a big old dose of reality of what life in the Big 12 is going to be like. And like the Big 12 is changing. Texas and Oklahoma are leaving the conference. I still think it's going to be a really good conference. You have Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado coming in. Like those are teams that I think can attract talent at a fairly good clip. Colorado, especially. This is a deep league. This is a league that I think BYU is not used to seeing teams with as much or more talent than them week after week after week after week. And I'm a little worried about their long-term future, I guess, remaining competitive in the Big 12. I don't think they're going to fall off the face of the earth. I still think it's a proud program. It's a physical program that maybe just having a little bit of a down year, but they also expect to win, and I think win a lot. They've only had 4 losing seasons since 2000. I think they are in danger of having a losing season this year. And if the head coach is expressing some doubts and some concerns about being able to stay competitive or be competitive in the Big 12, then I'm going to grab onto those two and just put it out into the world that I'm a little worried about where they are at the moment.
I think like hey, Big 12, like, sorry about that. We didn't mean it. We're at have BYU, Boise, Oregon State, Washington State as the Big 4 in the Mountain West, like banging heads against each other to go to take that, take a playoff spot every year. I'm here for something like that in a huge way. So, all right, the Frantic 14 was more like the Frantic 24 this week. We wanted to hit a lot of teams. Time to dig in on the best teams and the best players. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. Back on Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. Time to do our Kings of the North team rankings, Landis. And Washington is number 1 for both of us. This is not a surprise. We've kind of gone back and forth with Washington and Michigan. We just had a point where whoever was going to win that Washington-Oregon game was going to be the best team in the North for right now.
That's kind of where I was. Yeah, I would have voted it either way. And Oregon won that game because we're trying to, at least I am trying to find a balance between power rating and resume rating. But Washington has been mostly dominant and also now has probably the best win of anyone on this list. So
Yeah, resume. Washington absolutely deserves to be here. Just like dominance week to week, we've kind of talked about this. I think there's more and more conversation happening around the country of, is Michigan the best team in the country? I think they might be. And if I was doing a national poll, I think I might have Washington 1, Michigan 2. And I don't understand why Washington is not higher in the AP and coaches poll. Like I understand that people are bad at voting, but I just, if you watch them and now you look at that win against Oregon, I don't get it. So for us, it's Washington 1, Michigan 2, Ohio State 3, Penn State 4, Oregon and Oregon State tied for 5th, Utah and Notre Dame tied for 7th. Those are the 8 teams that we feel are worth being ranked at this point. And now what we want to talk about is the best wins in the regular season for these teams in the college football playoff era. And the reason we want to talk about it is because a bunch of them might be happening right now this season, because this is such a good year for so many teams in the North. Let me give you a stat first, Landis. I looked up regular season top 10 wins for the 8 teams that we have ranked here. Okay. In the last 9 years, right? So since 2014, regular season, not conference championship game, not playoff or bowl. Who do you think has the most of the 8 teams that we're talking about here?
regular season top 10 wins.
Yeah.
Utah.
No, it's Ohio State.
Okay.
Here's the numbers. Ohio State has 13. Oregon has 6. Michigan has 5. Washington, Oregon State, and Notre Dame have 4. Utah has 3.
Mm.
And Penn State has 1. Now, I didn't do records, right? You know what? You have to have opportunities to do this. But I do think I was surprised by this number. It's a little context for Ohio State people who are like, oh, Ohio State never wins any big games. 13 top 10 regular season wins, and the next best in your cohort is less than half that. I don't know. That's something, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. You don't have the breakdown of how many of those wins came under Urban Meyer and how many were under Ryan Day, right?
No, I don't. Do your own
Yeah.
stats if you want breakdowns.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
No,
Because
but it's one of those things like Notre Dame the past 2 years is 2 of them,
yeah,
right?
yep.
For instance.
And
So,
Michigan the last 2 years I think would be 2 losses, right?
yep,
And I don't know how many other top 10. Oregon was that a top 10 game? I can't remember.
it was.
Yeah.
No,
So
it wasn't. The top 10 went for Oregon. Oregon wasn't in the top 10, though.
right.
Anyway,
So I think Ryan Day's had fewer opportunities maybe in the regular season than Urban Meyer
yeah.
had. Yeah.
So it's still one of these things. So it's like getting big wins in the regular season, right? So here's what we want to talk about: what they've been and what they could be. So let's do Washington first, because Washington's at the top. The candidates for Washington's best regular season win in the 14 playoff era, they blew out number 6 Stanford in 2016 when Stanford was 6 and Washington was 10. And that was like on the way to Washington making the playoff. They also beat Washington State in the Apple Cup at the end of that season when they were both ranked in the top 25. And then they beat Oregon last year, right? But I think it's this. I think it's the game they just won is their best regular season win of the 14 playoff era, because that Stanford win back then was earlier in the season. You weren't exactly maybe sure what you were aiming toward. I think right now Washington knows exactly what's on the table, what all the possibilities for this season are. And then they went out and beat a really good Oregon team. I think we just saw Washington's best win in the regular season since 2014.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think it's particularly close. Like those other wins are impressive, I suppose, but like given the stakes, the narrative, everything at play with this year's game at Oregon, yeah, it's definitely this one.
All right, so Washington just had it. Ooh, exciting.
Mhm.
and they have some games left. I don't know. Maybe they'll be even better. All right, Michigan. The only two candidates I think for Michigan are 2021 Ohio State and 2022 Ohio State. So I think it's 2021 Ohio State, Michigan 6, Ohio State's 2. It's the first win that matters in forever. It's the beginning of the new era of Michigan. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. A win that was desperately needed in the rivalry for Michigan, and they did so in impressive physical fashion. Not only changing the story on their own program, but also changing the story on Ohio State a little bit too, in the way people think about them. So yeah, unquestionably, 2021.
And I don't think any win Michigan gets this season would outdo that,
Nope.
because that one was the first that sort of created all of this that has come after it. All right, let's do Ohio State. I think Ohio State's is the 2016 double overtime Michigan game. That was a 2-3 game. It keeps Ohio State on track. It gets them in the college football playoff, basically, even though they don't go to the Big Ten title game, they do make the playoff, and it repels Michigan trying to reach Ohio State's level for at least a couple more years. Would you agree with that for Ohio State? And again, they have more options.
Yeah, I think that's definitely it's like a classic all time game too,
Yeah.
right? So I think that that helps the cause here. I don't. I what are some other? Do you have like some other candidates that could potentially give it a run for its money? Because off the top of my head, I can't really think of any. Like they've
Yeah.
had
No.
wins, but I don't not like that.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's like, I don't know, like going to Oklahoma and winning in 2016.
Yeah,
They had a Wisconsin win in 2016. They go up like in 2014 and beat Michigan State in the regular season, right? A couple, like they have
that
some
was a
Penn,
pretty good one. Yeah,
some of these good Penn. Yeah, they back to back in 17 and 18 Penn State wins by 1 point against good Penn State teams. So they have more candidates, but I think it's got to be a Michigan win, and I think that's the one that stands out. And then it mattered in the moment for the rivalry, but it also propelled them, which I think is like the two things you're kind of looking for.
yeah,
I also do think if Ohio State beats Michigan this year, I think this might be it.
yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah, I think that's right.
So like undefeated Michigan, you get off the 2-game slide against Michigan. So again, this is Ohio State has a chance to have its biggest regular season win of the playoff 14 playoff era. This season still ahead of it. Penn State, the only candidate is 2016 Ohio State in Happy Valley. They block the field goal, run it back. Miracle win at the end that propels Penn State to the Big Ten championship game. They should have made the playoff. They didn't. They go to the Rose Bowl. It's part of a 9-game winning streak in that season. It's a great win. I also think if Penn State beats Ohio State on Saturday, it will be Penn State's best regular season win of the 14 playoff era.
It'll be Penn State's best regular season win since the 2005 win against Ohio State, right?
Yeah, Tom Ali against Troy
Troy
Smith,
Smith.
like
Yeah,
that game when USC and Texas played the game of the century for the national title, but Ohio State and Penn State were probably the third and fourth best teams in the country that year and would have made a 14 playoff. I think that's probably right.
yeah, because 2016 was a great win for James Franklin and like a fun game, and I think a game that people there remember for a long time. In terms of stakes, like it got them to the Big Ten championship game, but that season had sort of already gotten away from Penn State in terms of being able to make the college football playoff. I guess you could argue that they should have made it as a two-loss team. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But this is like everything is still on the line for Penn State, and it's not only putting yourself on the path to get to the playoff for the first time. It's also like James Franklin does not win these games.
Yeah.
Like in his career does not win these games, and I think he has to win them. So this is huge.
No, so I think we want to amplify how big this game is between Ohio State and Penn State at noon on Saturday in the Horseshoe, which we'll dig in deeper a little bit later in this show. Let's go to Oregon. Oregon, the candidates in 2014, the year they made the national title game, the first year of the playoff, they were number 3 and they beat number 7 Michigan State early in the season. They blew them out. That kind of established them as how good they were that year. And then 2021, they're number 12. They come to Columbus and beat number 3 Ohio State without Kayvon Thibodeau. He's hurt that game. I'm not sure which of those I would pick, but I think there's a chance that beating USC or beating Oregon State, if that game at the end of the regular season is to get in the Pac-12 title game, would have a chance to be Oregon's biggest regular season win of the 14 playoff era if you don't want to pick one of those other two.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I don't. The 2021 win in Columbus is a great win for them, but it didn't really send them anywhere. And then Mario Cristobal ended up leaving after that year anyway. Um, 20 like to win a game like they won in 2014 and then get to the national championship game is noteworthy, but I think you're right.
Because that Michigan State game was so early. Like, you knew Oregon was going to be good, but it wasn't like defining necessarily. This could be defining. So Oregon still has maybe its best win out in front of them this season. Oregon State. Oregon State's candidates are last year beating Oregon when Oregon State was number 22 and Oregon was number 10. And it set them up like they went to a bowl game and won and got a 10-win season. And like you beat your rival when your rival's really good. Like it's quite important.
Mhm.
Jonathan Smith is 2-3 against Oregon, which is pretty good considering before he got there, Oregon State had lost 9 of 10 to Oregon in that rivalry. So I don't want to downplay last year's win over Oregon, but Oregon State finishes this season with Washington, Oregon back to back. If they win one of those and that gets them in the Pac-12 title game, I think that becomes the best win.
Agree 100%. Yeah, it would be a nice bounce back for them too, because I in my mind they've lost a little bit of luster, so it would mean a lot if they won one of those games. And I
All
think
right.
they could win both, right?
They
It's
could
not,
win both.
yeah.
Well, you don't think that. I think that.
I wouldn't pick them to, but I think they're capable of it.
I think they definitely can win one. All right. Next is Notre Dame. Let's do Notre Dame. Probably Notre Dame's is 2020. They beat number 1 Clemson in the COVID year, 47-40. Ian Book throws for 310. Kyron Williams runs for 140. That is the game that Trevor Lawrence didn't play, but DJ Uiagalelei threw for 400. You're beating number 1, right? That's a huge game. Unless you want to take the win over USC last week, because that win, so 2020, that win for Notre Dame, it gets them in the playoff because they wind up playing in the ACC championship game that year against Clemson again, and they lose, and they still make the playoff because they were undefeated in the regular season and they had beaten Clemson before. So it was a huge thing. But now as we look back of it, it's sort of like it's a great win at the end of a Notre Dame era that was excellent but never got over the top. And I wonder when we look back at this USC win that Notre Dame got last week against the top 10 USC team, could this be a springboard in the Marcus Freeman era where you lose to Ohio State close, you beat Duke close, you lose to Louisville, and you come back and you blow out USC? I don't know how we might look back on this win, Landis, but what do you think the Notre Dame best win is?
I think I would take the USC win that just happened last week, and part of it is like I'm skeptical like of anything that happened in 2020. Like
Yeah, that's
they
fair.
happened, right? So you're not trying to erase that from history. The games were played and then happened, but the fact that Trevor Lawrence didn't play in that game, um, I think takes a little bit of the shine off of it. And I think I might buy some stock in the idea of this win over USC that happened Saturday night being a little bit of a springboard for Marcus Freeman. Like they needed, like I felt like they were in a the program wasn't reeling, but like to lose the way they lost to Louisville, like they just got their butts kicked, like and to bounce back and win that game, like out physical USC and just like smother them, I thought was pretty impressive. So I would take that one.
Yeah, beat the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, force him into 3 picks. That's I do think in context it really could be it, even though Clemson was number 1. All right, last one is Utah. I think it's last year beating USC 43-42 in that awesome game, which then sets up Utah to beat USC again in the Pac-12 title game. The other option is in 2021, they beat Oregon in the regular season and then beat Oregon again in the Pac-12 title game. So both times they beat a team in the regular season and then won the rematch. Those are both great wins. But that USC game last year, that was like an awesome. It's like Lincoln Riley's here to take over the world, and Kyle Whittingham was like, not so fast. I
Yeah,
think it's that.
I think it's that too. And I don't know, like we've talked about them having some good games remaining on the schedule and whether or not they can be a factor or spoiler or whatever in the Pac-12 race. It seems unlikely that doing any of that would actually get them back to the Pac-12 title game. So I think doing it last year is more impressive and more meaningful.
All right. So here's the final breakdown of these 8 teams. We're saying that Washington and Notre Dame just had their wins, just had their best regular season wins since 2014 last weekend. And we are saying that Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, and Oregon State have very legitimate chances to have their best wins ahead of them this season, including Penn State this weekend. That's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Like it's just there's opportunity, there's context, there's a high level of opposition. There are good teams with big chances against good foes. And that is not how it always is up here. which is why we're just hammering home the point that this is a great year of Northern football, man.
I would add to the Penn State Ohio State intrigue that 2016 Michigan I think is definitely number one on Ohio State's list. Beating this Penn State team would be very high up there
Yes.
on that list of top 10 wins for Ohio State. It might be number two. I think it would, and I don't think it has a case for one because of the classic nature of 2016 against Michigan, but I think it is comfortably number two if Ohio State wins this game.
All right. Big games, big games, big games. We cover them here on Kings of the North. When we come back, we'll go briefly behind enemy lines and tell you why everybody in the North would beat everybody in the South. Next after this. All right, time to go behind enemy lines. That's where Bill Landis and I rank the 5 best teams in the South, but we're immediately going to go to matchups with the 5 best teams in the North with our rankings this week. Our rankings of the 5 best Southern teams at the moment: number 1, Florida State; number 2, Georgia; number 3, Oklahoma; number 4, Texas; number 5, Alabama. We actually had Georgia and Oklahoma tied, and we actually had North Carolina and Alabama tied, but I want to do matchups, so we won't worry about ties. It's just 2 guys voting. You're going to have ties all the time. Let's do this. Our number 1 matchup would be Florida State versus Washington. Our number 1 North team versus our number 1 South team. These were honestly like the 2 teams I had my eye on in the offseason. I picked Florida State to win the national title. I really liked Washington. I wasn't sure that anybody in the Pac-12 would get there. As we sit here today, who do you think would win this game?
It's an interesting time to ask the question because Florida State seemed to get some stuff figured out last week, or back on the right track because they had been
Yep.
playing with their food a little bit prior to that. Um, I don't know. I think it's. I mean, I want to watch it. I want to watch the Washington aerial assault, and I want to watch Keon Coleman on the other side, and may the best team that can throw the most long touchdown passes win. I think I'm a little inclined to take Florida State because I think Florida State's pretty good on the lines, but I also thought that about the Oregon game, and it did not prove to be that much of a difference. So I think I would take Washington here.
Yeah, I think it's like on a neutral site, it might almost be a pick 'em.
hmm
Maybe Florida State would be slightly favored, but I do think Washington, just the assaulting nature, the relentless nature of Washington's offense, I think is maybe a step above Florida State. Florida State at its best has looked very good. They haven't looked like at their best every single week. So slight edge to Washington here. Matchup number 2 is Michigan versus Georgia. And we're running this back, a replay of the 2021 college football playoff semifinal when it was clear that Michigan just couldn't compete at that level. I think we're past that though, aren't we?
I think we're past that, up front for sure. I wouldn't have many worries about Michigan being able to handle Georgia's offensive line. I think in fact Michigan might be better on both lines, or at least playing better on both lines this year than Georgia is. The question in my mind is Michigan able to throw the ball in a way that I think you need to throw it to beat Georgia? I think you have to have some semblance of a passing attack like the one we saw from Ohio State in the Peach Bowl last year to give Georgia a run for its money. And I think Michigan is more equipped to do that this year than it was when they played them a couple years ago, than it was last year. But I don't know if it's all the way there yet. So that's a question in my mind. But I think physicality, Michigan is up to task, and it feels like they've been building their roster, I think, to win this game. Right?
Yeah.
They basically said it. So I think I would take Michigan right now.
I think Georgia's favored by like 4.5, but I'd take Michigan. I'd take the Michigan money line on this one too. I believe in JJ McCarthy a lot more than I believe in Carson Beck. And I think that Jesse Minter and the Michigan defense would find a way to limit Brock Bowers, and then I don't know where Georgia turns.
Right.
Right. And then I do believe Michigan doesn't have Brock Bowers, but Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, their tight ends, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson. I think they have more options offensively than Georgia does. And, the Georgia defense is excellent. The Michigan defense is also excellent. So I think I would love to see this matchup.
Yep.
Like games we want to see. If you said this is the playoff, Washington, Florida State is a semifinal and Michigan, Georgia is a semifinal, sign me up. Be awesome. But I think the North would have a really good chance in both games. Right, number 3, we're going to do Ohio State from the North and Oklahoma from the South. High scoring. I'd sign up for this one too. What do you think?
Yeah, I think potentially high scoring. I don't. The way that Cincinnati's defense was able to give Oklahoma some problems earlier this year. And granted, it was like a noon game on the road for Oklahoma, and that's probably a factor too. Like they would certainly be more up for this game than maybe they were for that game. But I don't know that this Oklahoma offense is a sledgehammer. I think it's pretty good. I think Dylan Gabriel is a little volatile at quarterback. So I think I'd like the matchup for Ohio State's defense against Oklahoma's offense. Um, but maybe I don't know. Maybe I like the Oklahoma defensive matchup against Ohio State's offense a little more at the moment because Ohio State's offense I think is still figuring stuff out. Um, I think I would err on the side of Ohio State's defense is better and their offense, if it's clicking, is better. So I would take Ohio State, but I think it's close.
I think Ohio State favored by 3.5, I think maybe in this
Mhm.
one. I'd take Ohio State. Number 4, Texas from the south, Penn State from the north. Another one I want to see. Like Quinn Ewers against this Penn State defense. Give me this one, man. And this is one of those, I mean, everyone does bowl projections. I've seen like multiple like New Year's 6 bowl projections where a Penn State Texas matchup happens. What do you think?
You got to be taking the under in this game,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Texas's offense is weird, and Penn State's offense is just not explosive. And I think so Texas has done a really good job building up its lines under Steve Sarkisian, and I think Texas's offensive line is quite good. I would very much like to see the Penn State defensive front going up against this Texas offensive line. I think that's a matchup of two of the best units in the country, I believe. Um, I think I might lean Texas a little bit here, maybe, and maybe that's because we've seen Texas in big games so far, and I know they've gone 1-1, but I think they've acquitted themselves pretty well in big games. We just haven't seen Penn State in that kind of game yet, so I think I'm a slight lean towards Texas.
I'll say Texas by 2.5, but I'll take Penn State. I think Texas would have trouble with this Penn State defense. Last one is Bama, Oregon. Bama from the south, Oregon from the north. Bama, again, I mean, they end up in a 1-score game with Arkansas last week, and Oregon goes toe-to-toe with Washington. How do you think this plays out?
I like the hypothetical matchup of a one offense that wants to throw a million screens and another offense who the only thing they can do is throw it 60 yards down the field and hope someone catches it,
Yeah.
which is what this game would be. I would take Oregon because Oregon has better balance. I think Alabama's defense is better than Oregon's, probably by a significant margin. And Alabama's defense is one of the best in the country, but they just don't have a whole lot going for them on offense. And Oregon is good enough, I think, on defense and good and balanced on offense. So I take the Ducks.
Bama favored, though? Bama by like
Yeah.
4.5?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
All right. I'll take
Yeah.
Oregon, too. I got 5 North wins. What do you got? 5 North wins?
I got 4 North wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Let's do this. Let's just stop the regular season right now and play a 10-team playoff that is this. So anyway, we're sneaking behind enemy lines. We're not that scared. When we come back, Knights of the North, we're going to do the best players in Northern college football, and we're going to ask the question, is one of them going to win the Heisman? Now, one of them is going to win the Knight of the North, which is frankly, yeah, come on. It's even better than the Heisman.
Right.
But the Heisman, for the moment, is more well-known. So we'll do that next after this. All right, Landis, Knights of the North, best players. Sometime we did best receivers one week. We've done best quarterbacks. I think we owe everybody like best defensive players
Mhm.
one of these weeks. But I like when we do the overall player rankings. And so this is just you and I picking the best football players, the guys who do their jobs the best in Northern football. And we were united on Michael Penix Jr., the Washington quarterback, being number 1. Is that a no-doubter?
It was a no doubter for me. Yeah, there were some questions. I think 2 and 3 with the two guys we have 2 and 3, but
Yep.
yeah, no doubt about it. Michael Penix number 1.
So we have the guys tied at 2 because you had him 2-3 and I had him 3-2. I had Marvin Harrison Jr. second, the Ohio State receiver. Rome Odunze, the Washington receiver, third. You had Odunze second and Harrison Jr. third. I think it's a coin flip either way. Odunze was everything he was cracked up to be in that Oregon game, an absolutely true number 1 receiver, big, physical, dangerous. But Marvin Harrison Jr., without Emeka Egbuka, was the entire Ohio State offense for part of that game in the win against Purdue last week. He had 10 targets. I think Ohio State's doing a really good job of getting Marvin Harrison Jr. the ball and letting him be dominant. He did have some drops in that game. He is still an absolute go-to guy, and he's also playing with an injured ankle. So I think it's a coin flip. I don't think it's worth like We're not going to first take it. That's not what we're going to be here.
Mhm.
We're not going to scream at each other because you picked Odunze and I picked Harrison when they're both awesome choices. Why did you pick Odunze? Just go try it.
No, I think it's a coin flip too, and it's like it just so we did this at a time when Roma Dunze just he got to play Oregon and he played really well and he had the game winning touchdown in that game. And if Marvin Harrison does a similar thing against Penn State this week, then maybe he goes right back to number 2 for me. Like it's not if I could have put them 2A and 2B, I would have, but I had
Yeah.
to rank 1, 2, and 1, 3. So I gave Roma Dunze the advantage here because of the nature of the game that Washington just happened to play. But they're both great, and I think Ohio State is now using Marvin in a way that will keep him at the top of this list because we've had him like a little lower than this at points previous.
Yeah. Opportunity matters. You have to have the chance to show how good you are. And they've been doing he's had 13 targets each of the last 2 weeks for Ohio State. That's more than he ever had in his life before. He never had 13 targets in a game last year. So
Yep.
like this is what you want to see. They're moving him around a little bit. They're using him in different ways. I thought the touchdown that they threw to him last week against Purdue, they had him lined up in the slot. They motioned G. Scott Jr. as a tight end out wider than him, and Julian Fleming was wider than him. And you create almost a forced one-on-one matchup that he wins. And that was like, oh, motion the tight end out to make Marvin the inside receiver of 3 guys on one side of the field. Like, wasn't that exactly the way you want them to try to create matchups for him?
Yes, and his snap percentage of times in the slot has been up the last 2 weeks. Now that coincides with Emeka Ibuka being hurt, so maybe that's not real. I hope it is, because they are seemingly being a little more creative with him. They also had 2 completions to him where they were like motioned him into the backfield and then ran him back out to where he came from, got him in space, got him the ball quickly, and I think
Yeah.
he gained like a total of like 35 yards on those 2 catches. So they're weaponizing him, or at least they did against Purdue the way I envision them doing all year. It's taken to this point to get there, but I hope it continues.
Yeah. It's a good trajectory. Number 4 is Jonah Ellis. He's the rush end from Utah. He has 9 sacks. That's second in the nation. He has 7 sacks in his last 3 games. He's awesome. He's the best edge guy in the North, and I don't think it's close.
He's the most productive for sure. It's hard, I think, to differentiate because there's some really good guys, like good edge rushers in the North who don't have a boatload of sacks or a boatload of pressures or a boatload of TFLs. Um, so I'm fine giving a tip of the cap to Jonah Ellis, who has been very good and very productive on one of the better defenses in the country.
Yeah, and he's like an example of like, hey, Utah's good. Why is Utah good? Because they get after you defensively, and this is the guy leading the charge.
Mhm.
We have a 3-way tie for 5th that makes me so happy because it perfectly exemplifies what we are trying to do with this show. The context we are creating, the world that we are inviting people into on a weekly and soon daily basis, Landis. We have a 3-way tie for 5th between Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy, Notre Dame left tackle Joe Alt, and Oregon running back Bucky Irving. And it is the only place in the world where those 3 guys could be tied for anything. But I think it is absolutely deserve it. I think we nailed it.
Yeah, I think we did too. Of those 3, I had Bucky Irving ranked the highest on my list. Again, that's maybe being a little bit prisoner of the moment with the big game over the weekend, but I thought he played very well against Washington. He's a threat in the run and the pass. I think he's 22nd in the country in yards from scrimmage per game. So like if you
Second in the North, second
sec-
among our guys,
yeah, so like if you look at
behind
just
only Roma Dunze.
if you look at pure rushing stats, you might think like, oh, well, he's not doing a whole lot. Like look at the receiving stats too, because he's a big part of that offense. Joe Alt continues, I think, to be the best offensive lineman in the country, and JJ keeps playing well. So like I think all 3 of these guys deserve to be on this list, deserve to be closer to the top half of the list, which is why they're all tied for 5th.
Love it. And if you're mad about JJ, hold on. We're going to talk about JJ more in a second. Number 8 is Cooper DeJean, kind of representing the Iowa defense as a corner playmaker, just like playmaker. Is he
Mhm.
not like tip of the spear of this Iowa defense? We both voted for another Iowa defensive player as well, but I think he is emblematic of how well this Iowa defense is playing.
I had him high. I had him 4th.
Yeah.
Because of everything you said, he's also a weapon on special teams. I think if they played him on offense, he'd be their best
Yeah.
offensive player. He's that kind of
Everybody
athlete.
else is doing it. Come on,
Yeah.
Brian. Try
Yeah.
it.
Brian Ferentz, don't be afraid to emulate Iowa and stick Cooper DeJean in the backfield or flip him a swing pass or something.
Yeah.
He's incredible. He's really good. Hard to throw against, disruptive, explosive, like everything you want.
9 is Troy Franklin, the Oregon receiver. We talked about him before the game. Is everybody like the whole Oregon offense is flip it short yards after the catch, except for Troy Franklin. He's that and the deep shot. You saw them take deep shots to him. Really good in a huge game, was he not?
He was really good, yeah, stepped up there, and he lives a slightly different existence from Roma Odunze into Washington receivers, right? I think you could sell out a little more to try to take Troy Franklin away and maybe in some way limit Oregon's offense, and I think teams try to do that, and he is productive regardless, so, his performance in that game probably gets overshadowed a little bit because they lost in the way that they lost, but he was very good in that game.
And then number 10 is a guy that you did not vote for, but I voted really high, which is wound up number 10 on this list. It's Denzel Burke, the Ohio State corner. You had Tyleik Williams, the Ohio State defensive tackle, as your highest Buckeye, very
Mhm.
high. I didn't have him in my top 15. I got Denzel on here just with my vote. You almost got Tyleik on here just with your vote. What's the balance of those two, do you think?
They're both they're the 2 best players on a really good defense. And I voted for Denzel previously, and, like, I think he very much deserves to be in this conversation. I probably should have voted for him. But I wanted to point out Tyleek. Like, I think
Yep.
Tyleek Williams is playing certainly, like, one of the better defensive linemen in the North. I think, like, one of the better defensive linemen in the entire country, and he's playing a lot of snaps, and he remains productive throughout the entirety of the game, and I think Ohio State's defense would look drastically different without him in the middle right now, just, like, messing stuff up. He's not super productive statistically, but he is a load in the middle of that defensive line, and it opens up a lot of things for everybody else on a very good defense.
And playing a ton of snaps too. Like when
Yeah.
it comes down to it's like, hey, are you out there a lot? You and I both voted for Jay Higgins, the Iowa linebacker who has a gazillion tackles. He didn't
Mhm.
get quite into the top 10. Bo Nix, the Oregon quarterback, we voted for. He didn't quite get into the top 10. Blake Corum, the great Michigan running back, we both voted for. He didn't quite get into the top 10. So our top 10 again, Michael Penix Jr., the Washington quarterback, is one. Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State, Roma Dunze from Washington. I think the two best receivers in the country. They're tied for two. Jonah Ellis, defensive end from Utah, is four. Tied for fifth, J.J. McCarthy, the Michigan quarterback. Joe Alt, the Notre Dame tackle. Bucky Irving, the two-way threat running back at Oregon. Number 8, Cooper DeJean, the Iowa cornerback, who could be even more if they asked him. Number 9, Troy Franklin, the Oregon receiver. Number 10, Denzel Burke, the Ohio State cornerback. So let's talk Heisman. Michael Penix, who's number 1 on our list, is minus 140 on DraftKings to win the Heisman now. He has become the overwhelming favorite, both with his performance in a big win and Caleb Williams, the reigning Heisman winner, who threw 3 picks at Notre Dame and I think took himself out of the race.
Mhm.
As we think about it right now, Penix is minus 140. Dylan Gabriel, the Oklahoma quarterback, is 10 to 1. JJ McCarthy, Michigan quarterback, is 10 to 1. Jordan Travis, the Florida State quarterback, is 12 to 1. Then it's a drop down to Caleb Williams at USC and Bo Nix, both at 20 to 1. But I think there are 3 guys in the North who could win it. One is Michael Penix, one is JJ McCarthy, and one is Marvin Harrison Jr., who is 60 to 1 right now, which I that feels low to me because I think you can see the path. Let's start with Marvin Landis. Do you think there is a path for Marvin Harrison Jr. to actually win the Heisman?
I do, yeah. I've thought that all year. And there's been a dynamic in play at Ohio State the last few years where like they've had really good receivers, but the quarterback has been the one that's gone to the Heisman Trophy ceremony. I actually don't know if that's been right every time that that's happened. I think they're like Garrett Wilson, for instance. I thought maybe should have gotten more Heisman consideration in 2021 than CJ Stroud did. Um, Marvin Harrison Jr. exists in a different world. Like, I don't think it's going to be Kyle McCord who steals that shine as long as Marvin is the one he's throwing the ball to. If Kyle ends up like throwing 5 touchdowns against Penn State and Michigan, and for some reason only like a couple of those go to Marvin and they spreads the love around a little bit, maybe that sends Kyle to New York or gets him in that conversation more than it does Marvin. But I think the way that they've used Marvin the last 2 weeks, the targets that he's getting, the targets that he should get, put him in a position to do this if he is productive against Penn State and Michigan, and obviously if Ohio State wins those games. Like I think if they win those games, I think Marvin is probably the reason it happens. So if that's the case, then I think Marvin definitely has a path.
I think it is a remarkably clear path. And I was all in on Jackson Smith and Jigba as a Heisman candidate before his season blew up last season. But I think a world where Ohio State is 13 and 0, Big Ten champ, and where Washington has lost, right? even if Washington's the Pac-12 champ, if they're one loss, but especially if they're not the Pac-12 champ, if Washington doesn't win the Pac-12 and Ohio State is the undefeated Big Ten champ and Marv has continued to be Marv, I think he wins.
Yep.
Like I think they like George is not going. Carson Beck's not winning now. I didn't see what his odds are. Brock Bowers would enter the conversation there because if it becomes Georgia and Ohio State are the two best teams and they're led by two extraordinary skill players, the best receiver and the best tight end, you can have a conversation now. Receiver is an easier conversation than tight end, though.
Mm-hmm.
So I like 60-1. I think he wins in that scenario. So, but it has to be that. But I think all of that is possible. I think if Oklahoma's undefeated, right, and in that mix, Washington's lost, Ohio State's undefeated, I think Marv beats out Dillon Gabriel. I don't think anyone wants to give the Heisman to Dillon Gabriel. No offense to Dillon Gabriel. It's more exciting to vote for Marvin Harrison Jr., and it's the story of the season award.
I agree with you. I don't really consider Dillon Gabriel much of a threat. If I guess his stats don't really stack up, but like, what like Keon Coleman do anything for you if Florida State finishes the season undefeated?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think you're starting to split stuff there with Jordan Travis, and Johnny Wilson is still a productive receiver for them. I don't. People would argue Jared Verse might be their best player. I don't know. I think it's a more complicated case for Keon Coleman. You're trying to make the same case you're trying to make for Marvin, except Marvin is cleaner and Marvin was more established coming into the season, which does matter a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the production, there's a gap in the production between the two of them too, which I think matters in this conversation. So I'm with if this season plays out in the way we just laid out, then I do agree with you that Marvin wins.
Okay. JJ McCarthy, absolute path.
Mhm.
And I, before the season, picked Jordan Travis from Florida State as my Heisman winner. And I talked about the Troy Smith path. JJ McCarthy's on the Troy Smith path right now, which means you are not a devastating statistical quarterback. He is averaging 216 passing yards per game. That's 60th in the country. When Troy Smith won the Heisman for Ohio State in 2006, he was 38th in the nation in passing yards. It's not about stats. It's about efficiency, leadership, awesome team, representative of that awesome team. A year ago, if he had stayed healthy, I think Blake Corum might have won the Heisman. I think J.J. McCarthy probably has become the Michigan representative. And if Michigan is undefeated and 13-0 and has vanquished Penn State and Ohio State, I think it comes down to a McCarthy-Penix race. JJ's not going to win it statistically. He has no chance there. But if there's any bobble by Penix, absolutely JJ McCarthy can win.
He can. It's interesting to me that because I think that's been true all year, right? I think JJ came into the season with that path on the table, but Michigan's not chasing it. Michigan is not throwing it when they shouldn't throw it, is taking him out of games in the fourth quarter when they're up comfortably and not chasing like meaningless statistical production. So could that come back to bite Michigan and JJ if he finds himself in this conversation? Unfortunately, I think yes, because the nature of voters for this award is they just pull up cfbstats.com and see who has the most touchdown passes and most yards. Like JJ is number 2 in the country in passing efficiency, which I think should matter. And you have to like watch the games, watch them play. And so like I'm considering him like as a Heisman voter, like I have him in mind for sure. Does the collective Heisman voting body have him in mind? I'm not entirely sure, but if he plays well against Penn State and Ohio State, they win those games. He's definitely in it.
JJ 1,500 passing yards, Michael Penix 2,300 passing yards. So again, it's just that you can't, if you're stuck on that and you just can't get past that with JJ McCarthy, then you're just going to go look for Michael Penix or Dillon Gabriel or Caleb Williams or Bo Nix or not random quarterback, good quarterback X who has bigger stats.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're hung up on that, then JJ doesn't have a case. But if you want to reward the best team in the country and the guy who drives that team forward, then I think JJ's case is very clear. But I do understand why Michael Penix is the odds-on favorite here. The question to me, Landis, is I think eye test there, stats there, good team there. Check, check, check. If Washington loses twice, would he still win? Because I made a big deal last year. Like, we've just given it to guys who are in the playoff. for the most part in the 14 playoff era. Caleb Williams was the exception to the rule last year, and it's because there's nobody else to give it to. So I think in a season like this, it is very, very, very likely that the Heisman winner will be from one of the 4 playoff teams. Does that mean that Washington must make the playoff for Michael Penix to win the Heisman?
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that. I think he could have a Caleb Williams path to winning it if Washington were to fall out of the race, because the statistical production is just so much better than everyone else. Like, there are other guys who have like similar touchdown numbers, I guess. Like Caleb Williams has more touchdowns than Michael Penix, Shadur Sanders, and Jaden Daniels do at LSU in Colorado. But I don't think you consider them. So, like, if Michael Penix remains at or near the top in all the important statistical categories and Washington ends up losing a game or two, I still think he can win it, because now people are paying attention to him after what happened last week. And if there's just not a surefire winner, which I'm not convinced maybe there will be, like an obvious guy to pick, I still think he can get there even if they don't have a playoff team.
That would be fascinating. That's the most interesting race, I think. Say there's a world where the playoff is Georgia, Florida State, Michigan, and Ohio State. And once again, so it's Brock Bowers versus Jordan Travis from Florida State versus JJ McCarthy versus Marvin as like the candidates from the 4 playoff teams, or the Michael Penix eye test statistical case. Like, I think you're entering a situation where when they open that envelope, you don't know who the winner is.
Yeah, I think it would be the most compelling Heisman race we've had in a while, right? If that scenario plays out, yeah.
But like legitimate guys, and like Rome Odunze like can't win it because Penix is the Washington guy.
Mhm.
So like Rome Odunze is tied for second on our list, but you have to pick from a team. Is it receiver or quarterback? It can't be both. And I think at Washington it's quarterback. I think at Ohio State it's receiver. And I think at Michigan, in a world where last year it was running back, I think this year it's quarterback. So I think it's starting to evolve. Georgia has completely muddied the Heisman race the last several years because they've been the best team without an easy Heisman candidate to vote for. And then that just opens up the gates. And then again, if Bama rises back up, Bama doesn't have anybody. Like Bama doesn't have a Heisman candidate this year. So like there are like Dallas Turner's not going to win the Heisman. So like they're just, it opens doors in a really interesting way. But I think Michael Penix has the odds-on favorite right now.
If Washington goes undefeated and it's the Michael Penix Rome Odunze show from now until the end of the season, could they do a Mac Jones Devontae Smith thing?
Yes, well, not where the receiver wins, but where they both are finalists.
Where they both are finalists,
yeah. Where people are filling out their ballot and they're like, oh, Michael Penix is obviously number 1, but I'll tell you what, I got Rome Odunze too. I think people could do that. And where everybody else is being split and people are like, I don't know who to vote for third, JJ McCarthy or Jordan Travis. And the result is I think Rome Odunze could get to New York. He just has zero path to actually winning it.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with that. Yeah.
All right. And then we'll give him a crown or a sword or a helmet to be the Knight of the North. So again, this is the Knight of the North race as well. Joe Alt's still in it. Joe Alt's not going to win the Heisman. He might win our thing, though.
He's going to win my Heisman. I'll tell you that much.
Tell you what. When we come back, it's the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show, whether you like it or not. Next on Kings of the North. Back on the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show, I am wondering if this story is actually becoming inspiring, Landis. It is such a cluster. Iowa lost Luke Lachey, its best tight end. It lost starting quarterback Cade McNamara. Now Eric All, the next tight end, he's hurt as well. I've written a script for the inspiring tale of Brian Ferentz, no longer to be mocked, but instead to be embraced. Do you want to hear it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. From Nepotism Films, a story not just about heart, but about blood. Dad, there are thousands of people more qualified to be your offensive coordinator, but there's no one more qualified to be my son. They discovered that you don't need a functioning passing offense when you have each other. Last in completion percentage, but first in love. It's the story of a $7 million head coach, a 10-cent offense, and a bond that even 3 million tax-paying, disappointed citizens of Iowa couldn't break. Defenses could stop them repeatedly They were ranked 130th in third down conversion rate, but the doubters never could. Coming soon, and here are the 3 title options for the movie. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
We can either go with Remember the Punting,
Mm.
Hawkeyes, like instead of Hoosiers,
Mm-hmm.
or Brian's Wrong.
Oh yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
Yes.
that's the one.
So I fear that this is now becoming the tale of a bunch of underdogs who were trying to take on the world as every single player on their team got hurt. And yes, they are 133rd out of 133 teams in completion percentage at 45.6% this year, but they're 6-1 and they're going to win the West. What are we supposed to do with this at this point?
Embrace it, baby. I think that's all we can do. Iowa, I it's my favorite thing to do every week when we prepare for the show is to pull out Iowa offensive stats. They completed 6 passes for 37 yards. They had 9 first downs. They punted 10 times. They had 8 3-and-outs. And this is my favorite one. Between their touchdown in the second quarter and their field goal in the third quarter, Iowa had 6 possessions that accounted for a total of 3 yards on 18 plays. They won.
And they won. And they won. They are averaging 20.9 points per game. Iowa set out before the season that they have to average 25 points a game and win at least 7 games for Brian Ferentz to keep his job. They're going to win 7 games, but they are not going to average 25 points a game. They've only scored 25 in 2 of their 7 games so far. They scored 41 against Western Michigan and 26 against Michigan State. 90 of the 133 teams in major college football are averaging more than 25 points a game. So that is the threat. They wanted to be in the top 90. They're not.
Such a low bar.
They're 115th in points per game. They have 2 safeties. Nobody else in the nation has more than 1. So that's 4 extra points that most teams aren't getting. They had a safety against Wisconsin. Yards per attempt, 5.1. They're second to last in the nation. Passing yards per game, 116.6. They're third to last in the nation, and they're last in completion percentage. And their defense is only giving up 15 points a game, which is 10th. So, it is it continues to make me mad that they set out these parameters, because if the parameters didn't exist, I think it would actually be inspiring. Mm-hmm. It's I can't believe how bad the offense is. I can't believe all the injuries on offense they're having. But man, look at these guys. They're finding a way to win. And instead, they have this whole thing hanging over it. So, but maybe it's just inspiring anyway. I don't know. Is nepotism inspiring?
Apparently. It's a heartwarming story. Everyone wrap your arms around it.
No one's more qualified to be my son.
Yeah, that's the line. That's a good one. Yeah, that's great. Well, I was trying to I Rusted Root sent me on my way is that's playing underneath as we're running through all that. Yeah.
And they're just showing practice footage of quarterbacks just throwing the ball over the fence. Right? They go to the dinner table and Brian has his head in his hands and the whole Ferentz family comes over and gives him a big hug. And then you come in and it's walking out of the tunnel in Indianapolis in Lucas Oil, and it's They made it. And you know what the thing about it is? You know who's the villain in this story?
You.
Me. Hey, Kirk. Why do you love your son so much? I'll never apologize for loving my son. Oh, my God. Okay. You're inspired. By next week, maybe I'll just write it. I'll write a 200-page treatment.
Yeah.
Brian's Wrong. Okay.
That's such a good title.
Yeah. Worked on that one for a while. All right. When we come back, we'll be inspired by the look ahead. Games that matter in the North coming this week next after this. Back on Kings of the North, our look ahead. We're going to do 5 games that are kind of interesting, and then we'll do the big look ahead for Ohio State-Penn State, which will get that major focus treatment. First one in our regular look ahead, though. Noon on the Big Ten Network on Saturday, Rutgers at Indiana. Landis, Rutgers is favored by 4. We talked about how good this Rutgers defense is, and pair this with an Indiana quarterback situation, an offensive situation. They already fired the offensive coordinator this year. Indiana is really a mess, and I think they're getting frustrated, and I really do think we really might be ending nearing the end of the Tom Allen era here.
Yeah, I think so. Can we just take a second to appreciate the fact that Rutgers is a road favorite in the Big Ten for
Yeah,
back-to-back weeks? Like, what
that's
planet?
enough.
What planet are we on? Go get your bowl eligibility, Rutgers. This is the week to do it. Tom Allen is spending his post-game press conferences throwing everyone but himself under the bus for how bad their offense is. It stinks. Your defense is good. Go smother them.
All right, game number 2 is Washington State at Oregon, 3:30 on ABC. Oregon is favored by 18.5. This is on the list because of that spoiler upstart. Is Washington State still dangerous factor, and Oregon's coming off a very emotional, difficult loss. Are any alarms going off here?
Yeah, I think a little bit. One is like the physical toll of that game lingering for Oregon, I think is something. And I also wonder, like, I don't have any problem with the way that Dan Lanning managed that game. I very much applaud going for the win and not punting the ball to Washington at the end there. I do wonder how the players take it. Like, do they think that they were coached out of a game they should have won with all the fourth down tries that weren't really successful in that game? And does that linger at all for them too? I still think Oregon wins, but maybe would consider a Washington State cover here given some of the circumstances.
All right, game 3 is Minnesota at Iowa. It's 3:30 on NBC. Iowa at home, favored by 5.5. And you start going through the Iowa schedule, man, and it's like, who is going to get them? So they've already beaten Wisconsin and Purdue in the West, and now you're waiting for Northwestern Illinois, Minnesota, Nebraska, somebody to come get them. And I just don't know if it's going to happen. Does Minnesota have a chance to do it here?
Maybe they are coming off a bye week, so they've had some time to prepare for the vaunted Iowa offensive attack. I did not realize that PJ Fleck has never beaten Iowa.
Oh, I didn't realize that either.
He's Iowa, so that they play for the Floyd of Rosedale. It's a pig trophy. It's
Yeah,
the best.
great.
Iowa has won the last 8, and PJ Fleck is 0-6 against Iowa.
Oh, okay. Maybe this is a thing then, because like Minnesota's been a little underwhelming, a little bit of a weird season so far, but I still think they might be a decent team. Um, Interesting. Okay, let's keep our eyes on this. This could be one. This could be one to keep your eye on. Game number 4 is Michigan at Michigan State, 7:30 NBC. It's a big primetime game for the Peacock. Michigan favored by 25. And Michigan, in its last 3 games, is outscoring opponents 149-24. Michigan started out the year, did not cover its first 3 games, pushed in game 4, and has covered the last 3 weeks because they've won by 38, 42, and 45. Like they are not rounding into form. They have rounded into form. And it's just a reminder of this not very long ago was a super competitive, awesome rivalry that Michigan State actually had the edge in. This is almost like peak Michigan and bottomed out Michigan State for this to be a 25-point line.
Yeah, I think Michigan hammers them here. This is like we had the tunnel game last year
Yeah.
in Ann Arbor, so this is the first time they've played since then. Perhaps this gets a little chippy when it gets out of hand, but I don't think Michigan State has a shot. Had Michigan State beaten Rutgers last year and like gained
Last
some
week, yeah.
last week, sorry, and gained some confidence and like Harlan Barnett could like rally the troops here and get them to play well, maybe, but I don't think that's on the table now after the way Michigan State lost last week. So I think Michigan destroys them.
But probably worth the peak just to see like the interaction, see how
Yes.
this goes. Because Michigan State might have nothing to lose and just come out and try to ruin Michigan's season. I'm not saying that they would do anything untoward, but like they might just let it all hang out.
Yeah.
All right, last one here is Utah at USC. USC coming off just a terrible performance against Notre Dame. Utah at USC, 8 o'clock on Fox. USC at home is favored by 4.5. Utah's won the last 3 in this series, including beating USC twice last year to win the Pac-12. You had talked about the North sort of needed to finish off USC. Notre Dame certainly started that process last week, and it wasn't only like, hey, the USC defense is terrible. They had the Heisman winner throwing 3 picks. Does Utah truly like end this? Is this the last week that we pretend that USC is good?
I think, yeah, I think yes. And it wasn't really the last week was not really about USC's defense at all. It was USC's offensive line getting worked by Notre Dame. And I think that's going to happen again in this game against Utah. Like it's at the Coliseum. Maybe that's a little bit of a difference, I suppose. But I have more concerns about USC now coming out of that game than I had going into it because like I still think their defense stinks. And now it turns out their offensive line isn't very good either. So maybe Utah ends up not being able to score enough, even if they do give Caleb Williams some problems. Like, I don't think Utah is built to put a 40 burger up on USC, regardless of how the game plays out. But I do think Jonah Ellis might have 4 sacks in this game. So I think it's not a great spot for USC to be in if it's trying to bounce back from a disaster against Notre Dame, because I think Utah's defense is better.
And this is one of those things where rivalries develop in short periods in your conference sometimes. This has become like a really fun rivalry between Utah and USC, and this might be the last time they ever play.
Mm-hmm.
So appreciate this. It's going to be Big 10 and Big 12 next year for these two teams, but we have to remember how huge these two Utah USC games were last year. They were two of the biggest games in college football. They kept Utah single-handedly kept USC out of the playoff and put Ohio State in the playoff. This was one of those, like, right? Utah upsets USC in the Pac-12 title game. Everybody's like, Ryan Day, is he sending chocolates to Kyle Whittingham? Like, this is a thing. Lincoln Riley wants to get Kyle Whittingham back before he heads off to the Big Ten. So I think there could be a lot to this game. And I do think if Utah comes out and just kind of pushes USC around, I think we are going to start having, like, maybe once again and more than we ever have, start having fundamental questions about the way Lincoln Riley teams go about trying to be elite. And that would be a very interesting way for Lincoln Riley to enter the Big Ten. So this is a huge game for Utah, but I think it is almost it's a reputation game. It's a perception game. It's a gut check game for USC. And by the way, they're still undefeated in the Pac-12. So there's a lot of opportunity there still for them. But I just don't know how good they are. And Utah, I think, is going to help us find out. All right, when we come back, one game. These are all fine. They're good. Watch these games. Good. One game really matters in the North this week. You know what it is. We'll talk about that next on Kings of the North. All right, Doug and Bill with the game of the week. Penn State at Ohio State, noon on Fox in Ohio Stadium. Ohio State favored by 4.5. Ohio State's won 6 straight in this series, won 10 of the last 11. Since Penn State joined the Big Ten, Ohio State is 22-8 against Penn State. SP Plus rankings, Ohio State is 2nd. Penn State is 8th. Penn State has the number 2 defense. Ohio State has the number 4 defense. Let me give you a theory here, Landis. So we've had a lot of people talk about that with Michigan's schedule, you don't know very much about Michigan yet. Penn State has played just absolute 2 blowout ignore games against Delaware and UMass. Their other 4 games, West Virginia, Illinois, Northwestern, and Iowa, I don't think they've played a functional offense yet. So I don't doubt how good the Penn State defense is. I don't exactly know how good, but here's my theory. Drew Aller, the Penn State quarterback, has never thrown a pick in 241 passes in his career so far. Penn State is 2nd in the nation in time of possession. They have been grinding it out offensively. It has been a slog. But when you look at the past couple years when Penn State has played Ohio State, Sean Clifford at quarterback, they've come out and thrown it. I think maybe this whole Penn State offense this whole season has been a slow play, long con, don't show Ohio State anything. And Drew Aller's going to come out and throw it 40 times. And they actually might have substantially more offensively than they've shown. But James Franklin made a decision looking at the schedule and knowing that this maybe is the most important game that he has ever coached at Penn State, with an opportunity that they've never really had before, that he has been preparing for this every snap, every practice, every play of every game to this point. And we actually don't know what the Penn State offense looks like, because they're going to be completely different on Saturday than they've been in the first half of the season. Possible?
No, I don't buy that. No, I think the Penn State offense is like, it's not a bad offense. They hold the ball a long time, as you said. They've run it pretty well. They're one of the better rushing offenses in the country. They obviously have 2 very good running backs. I just don't think their passing game is particularly sophisticated or explosive, and that is not intentional. That's just who they are. They've also been the beneficiary of excellent field position. They're number one in the country in starting field position. And they've had some short touchdown or well, what should be short touchdown drives, particularly in the Illinois game, that were not short, that were not touchdown drives because they're not very good in the red zone either. So I actually don't think this offense is tremendous. I don't think the offensive line is as good as people were hoping it would be. I don't know that Drew Aller is ready for this spot. Maybe he is. I just don't think we know that yet. So no, I'm not. This has not been a season long con. I think from the Penn State offense, I think this is what they are.
All right, I'm not giving up. Let me try some more.
Okay.
In 2021, for the season, Penn State ran it 47% of the time and threw it 53% of the time. In 2022, they ran it 54% of the time and threw it 46% of the time. This season, they are running it 58% of the time and throwing it 42% of the time. So they've gone up 11% in 2 years for how much they run it, right? The last 3 times they played Ohio State, though, last year, 47 passes, 33 runs. 2021, 52 passes, 29 runs. 2020, 30 passes, 27 runs. So they've thrown it more than they've run it each of the last 3 years against Ohio State. Now they've been behind, so they've kind of had to. The most completions that they've ever had in a game under James Franklin is 35 completions against Ohio State in 2021. They had 32 last year. This is not who they are. This is not how they've come in and tried to. They have not tried to slog it out, especially against Ohio State. And they have leaned into this much more this season than they have in the past. Now you have Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Maybe you want to do that. They don't have, they have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who we've given respect to on this show before as a number one receiver, but they don't have the pass catchers maybe that they've had in the past. This is not their I think, chosen offensive identity, though. I don't think James Franklin, even with this good of a defense, believes they're going to come in and grind it out against Ohio State. The way they've lost the past couple of years is they haven't been able to stop Ohio State often enough. I think Penn State's combination of trying to win is play great defense, hold Ohio State down a little bit, and then take some chances on offense. I think it could look like what Michigan did last year, where Michigan was kind of like grind it out all season. Then they come out and throw it against Ohio State. I think that's the Penn State game plan. And that maybe they're not great at it, but maybe they've got to try. Do you think Penn State can win with great defense and the same style of offense they've played all year, which is run the ball? They're second in the nation in time of possession, play keep away, and rely on that. Is that an actual potentially winning formula for the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I think it could be. It's like what Notre Dame tried to do a little bit, I think, but I think Penn State's defense is more conditioned to get more splash plays potentially against Ohio State's offense, like to actually go out and win the game for them. So I think that could be their path to a win here. I think it will be their preferred path. Like I don't know, it's hard because they could come out and throw it, but then my answer is like to who? Because they're like they have Keandre Lambert-Smith and like the rest of the receivers haven't done anything this year. Their leading pass catchers this season are Keandre Lambert-Smith, a tight end, Harrison Wallace, another receiver, a tight end, and a running back. Like there are two receivers among their 5 most prolific pass catchers this year. I guess you could look at that and say, like, okay, well, if they're going to throw the ball to the running backs and tight ends, like, how does Ohio State counter that? Because I love the matchup of Ohio State's corners against Penn State's receivers. Maybe I love a little less the matchup of Ohio State's linebackers and safeties trying to cover tight ends and running backs. So is that an avenue for Penn State to exploit some things in the passing game? Potentially. But I think they have been trying to not overexpose Drew Aller this year. I don't think they've been saving him for something. So, I'm not on alert for that. Maybe I'll be wrong, but even if that's the case, I still think Penn State can beat Ohio State the way it has played this year, which is ball control and really good defense.
So the Penn State defense against this Ohio State offensive line in particular, looking at PFF with the number of pass rush opportunities and the number of times guys have gotten pressure, Adisa Isaac for Penn State has a 22.9 pressure rate. He has 19 pressures on 83 pass rush snaps. That's like through the roof, 22.9. Deni Dennis Sutton has an 18% pressure rate, and Chop Robinson is 16%. In comparison, for Ohio State, their best guys, JT Tuimoloau is 11.3%. Mike Hall is 11.6%. Jack Sawyer is 10.8%. So like Adisa Isaac is like double, like gets pressured twice as much as the Ohio State guys do. Again, not against functioning offenses. And it's really hard to get a read on this Penn State defense because they've played the second fewest defensive snaps of any team in the country. And then even a lot of those snaps have been blowouts. Abdul Carter, their linebacker, has played the most defensive snaps of anybody for them, 229. That's 115th in the Big Ten in defensive snaps this year. By comparison, Cooper DeJean, who we talked about from Iowa, has played 533 defensive snaps. So he's played twice as many snaps as Adisa Isaac so far, as Abdul Carter so far. And like Adisa Isaac hasn't even played 200 snaps this year. So they're fresh. They haven't been tested. Is there any part of the Penn State defense that you say, they're awesome statistically, not just the raw stats, but the inside stats, but maybe we just still don't know because Illinois, Iowa, Northwestern, and West Virginia just have not challenged them in any way?
Yeah, that's in my mind a little bit. I still think it's with the combination of the back end of the pass rush. I think what we've seen from the pass defense is real and will be real for the season. Um, I wonder if like good physical teams can't run the ball on them. Like we saw that happen last year. Like Michigan, I think gave Penn State a lot of problems through the middle of its defense and ran the
Yeah.
ball on them and pulled away with that game. Now, is Ohio State built to do that? I don't know, but I think they're going to try because it's a point you want to at least stress test if you're any team playing Penn State. Is like, did they actually get their defensive tackle play, their ability to stop a power run game figured out? Because they've not really played anybody who I think would show us that. But I also felt in watching the Illinois and West Virginia games, there were times when those two teams like ran the ball with some efficiency on them, not for the entirety of the game, but for long enough stretches where I thought like, oh, I wonder if this is actually fixed. It's not been that way season long because they've not really played anybody on offense, as you stated, and they have two basically FCS opponents in there that help pump up the numbers. But I think a lot of what we've seen from this defense is real. I do wonder if that's a potential vulnerability is running the ball against them.
The Ohio State defense is one of three teams in the nation that hasn't given up a 40-yard play from scrimmage yet. Penn State's defense has only given up one. So these are two defenses who are excellent at stopping big plays. The Penn State offense only has one play of 40 yards or more. That's last. Everybody else in the country has at least two. Penn State is, by that metric, the least explosive offense in the country. How is it possible the Ohio State defense dominates this game? Because they don't give up explosives. Penn State is not explosive, and Penn State keeps everything in front of them, and they make Penn State earn it time after time after time, and they just can't stay on point enough. Is it? Do you think Ohio State could come out and like only give up 10 points to Penn State or something?
Yeah, I think so. Penn State's one player 40 yards more, I think, was in the first game against West Virginia. It was a 75-yard touchdown pass to Keandre Lambert-Smith where he like stole an interception away from a defensive back. So they just haven't been able to manufacture explosive passing plays. And like James Franklin was asked about that 2 weeks ago and like went off on a reporter because it was asked a little weird, but I think that the heart of the question was worth asking. It's like, you guys don't throw the ball down the field well. What's up with that? Do you need to try it more? I don't think they're built to do it. Like Drew Aller has a huge arm. Like he's got a cannon for an arm. I think it's more about the receivers than it is Drew Aller. But I don't see them doing that. I would be surprised if we watch a game on Saturday and like suddenly Penn State's hitting Ohio State's defense for a bunch of explosive plays that it hasn't given up yet to this point. I think Ohio State's defense has been tested pretty well in that regard with some of the offenses they've played. So like I think that stat is real. And I do think that they are equipped to keep this Penn State offense out of the end zone. The fear is, does Penn State still hold it? Because we've seen teams still do that against Ohio State's defense, like get enough first downs to dominate time of possession and limit the opportunities for Ohio State's offense, but keep them out of the end zone, hold them to 10-ish points or like a touchdown or two. I think that is very much on the table.
Penn State's offense averaging 77 plays per game, Ohio State 64. Now that's thrown off a little bit because Penn State had 97 plays against Iowa. They beat Iowa 31-0. They had 97 offensive plays. Iowa had 33.
Didn't they have 90 against Delaware too?
Yeah, they've had some games where they just have sat on the ball the whole game. It is interesting. It's like lack of explosiveness is not great for an offense. I do think like against Ohio State, maybe it's not a problem. Like Ohio State wants to take that away anyway. So the idea of like, hey, Ohio State, take away the thing that we can't do. But we're going to settle in and try and put together 3 15-play drives on you, drive you crazy because you're going to only wind up with 7 possessions the whole game, and we're going to try to win 20-14. right? Like I almost think this sort of negative about the Penn State offense could somehow turn into a positive because Ryan Day has been, sort of wound up about the lack of possessions this year. We're going to do much more on this on Kings of Columbus on Wednesday. We're going to dig in for a full 90 minutes just on this game, even more in depth on the matchups. But for now, if you had one thing you think this game comes down to, the thing that matters the most, the matchup, the whatever, the style, the strategy, what is it?
Ohio State's offensive tackles against Penn State's defensive line, and like specifically, so they unveiled Penn State did a look. I want to say maybe the Illinois game, where they put Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, and Deni Dennis Sutton. They're three best pass rushers on the field together, which, like, to Ohio State fans, like, no duh, we've been doing that for a decade. Penn State has come around to the idea too. And it's like when you put those three guys on the field against Ohio State's offensive line, and specifically the tackles, and like say go win one-on-one matchups, I don't know that I love Ohio State's ability to win there. And I do think that's something that could make Ohio State's offense unravel a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. Like that, if they can just keep the Ohio State offense from functioning because they can't block anybody, like that is, and as much as we've talked about the Ohio State offensive line and the run game and that kind of thing, like if they can't throw it, and now you're in a game where it is low scoring and nobody's being explosive. We know Penn State's not explosive, but also Ohio State's not explosive because they don't have enough time for Kyle McCord to get anything down the field. Now you're in a game that Penn State maybe wants to play. I still am holding out for like, holy moly, this is they've been saving Drew Aller for a year and a half for this moment. So, and all of a sudden they come out and throw it around a little bit. I think it's going to be a good game. I'm excited for it. I think we've seen games live up to the billing. Florida State, LSU lived up to the billing. Oklahoma, Texas live up to the billing. Alabama, Texas live up to the billing. Washington, Oregon live up to the billing. Like we've been pretty good with the hit rate on big games living up to it. And I think Penn State, Ohio State will do that as well. But we have a whole week to get ready for it. And we will do that here on the podcast channel. For now, we'll appreciate everybody who joined us on this episode of Kings of the North, where we dive in to the best of Northern football. We contextualize, we celebrate, we talk about good, we talk about intriguing, we talk about teams that need to do it a little bit better. And we appreciate you guys joining us for every step of that. For now, for our great producer, Mike Rostowski, who makes this show better since he joined us, for my good pal, Bill Landis, in his Phillies hat. You feeling good about the Phils, by the way? Feeling good?
Nope.
Phillies are in the north. Phillies
That's
are in the
right.
north. Yeah. Arizona's in the south. So
Yeah.
cram it, Diamondbacks. There we go. Now you feel better. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.